Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 28th of September. Today we have some updates, so let's start. And first we're going to discuss one of the most important front line in this area, and we are going to discuss the area between Lyman and Oskil. This bridgehead, the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, let's say on Oskil-Lyman front line. The Russians are saying that as a result of the previous 24 hours, a lot of Ukrainian forces were under fire, and if we're talking about area between Oskil Frontline near Dvurechye, Kupiansk, as you know, these are the main positions of the 14th Mechanized and 92nd Mechanized Brigade. If we're talking about Dvurechye, the Ukrainians were planning to storm Talivazhanka, this small town, but the Russians managed to hold their position and they pushed the Ukrainians back, and they were moved back to the forest. As you can see, there is a very big forest right between the Russian position and the river, so that's why the Ukrainians decided to change their destination and they moved to the south in direction of Lyman I. But as far as I know, the Russians still control this town as well, so the Ukrainians couldn't develop their bridgehead. So as you can see, the Ukrainians are not very successful near this bridgehead, but they're moving more and more reinforcements to this area. And I believe that they're not very successful just because of one reason, because it's not very easy to move a lot of forces from railroad station in this direction. It takes time. But if we're talking about Kupiansk bridgehead, where the Ukrainians were they had more success. As you can see, this area is very close to the railroad station, so the Ukrainians on this bridgehead don't have any problems with support, supply, and so on. And if we take a look at this map, you're gonna see that the Ukrainians have some success there on the Russian side of the river, but anyway, they were slowed down or stopped, and during this day they didn't have any progress during the day. So we can say that the Russians, maybe the Russians managed to stabilize the front line in this area as well. Furthermore, there is a small station, this one, Kulagovka. The Russians are saying that a small group of Ukrainians were encircled in this area. I'm not sure about the number, maybe 10-20 soldiers anyway. As you can see, the Russians still control this area. And if we're talking about the global scope of this area, we understand that Ukrainians need just one point, just one town in this area, and this town by the name of Troitska, this one. This is the main area where the Ukrainians are planning to develop their offensive operation on Oskil Frontline. Why is that? This is the only railroad. If we take a look at this map at Lugansk People's Republic, you're gonna see that this is the only road that connects Russian Federation with we can say with LPR mainland. As you can see, and the Russians uses this road to move their forces in direction of Starobelsk, Belokuratina, Novoaidar, and from these logistics centers, they are doing their regrouping in direction of Svatova, and they're moving their forces on the front line. So this railroad is the most important. If the Ukrainians want to reduce the Russian power in this area, of course they need to do, first thing they need is to cut this road, and for these purposes they're trying to crack Dvurechye front line and to establish some bridgehead, and after that they will be able to achieve some operational square in front of them, and from these fields they will be able to develop their offensive operation in many directions, and the most important direction is Troitsk with one purpose: to cut this railroad. Now we are moving to the south to another important area. We are talking about Lyman, the defense Lyman operation. The Russians are calling this operation, the Ukrainians are calling like counter-offensive operation, but the Russians are calling all these clashes on this bridgehead is Lyman defense operation. So it's operation. And the Russians, I believe they know what they're doing, but anyway, today we got a lot of updates from this area, and the most important one, that Novoselovka has fallen. This small town was controlled by the Russian during the previous days, and if we are talking about the Western sources, they are very happy about this. But if we take a look at this map, Novoselovka is not the town you need to be happy about, because as you can see, this town is located on Ukrainian side of these small lakes, and this town doesn't change anything, because anywhere from this side it's not very easy to cross these lakes and to attack, let's say, Drobyshev from the back. I believe that that this town used to be a very long time in the gray zone, where the Russians just using the small roads between Dirilova and Novosovka sent their commandos just on purpose to slow down the Ukrainian offensive operation. The only one way how to attack Lyman is the area between Seversky Donetsk River, Yarova and Novosovka. So this is the front line, and this is the area where the Ukrainians are trying to attack Lyman bridgehead and Dibrova bridgehead. But as you can see, it is not very easy. This forest, of course, very important for the Ukrainians, but it doesn't play much. But because there's a very short area where the Ukrainians are able to attack, and all these roads between these rivers, between these, as you can see, there is another river which the Ukrainians need to cross before attack Drobышevo. So positioning here are not very good for the Ukrainians. And if we are talking about the Russian Ministry of Defense, today they reported first time during the Lyman defensive operation, they noted for the first time that as a result of failed offensive operation, 66th and 93rd Mechanized Brigade that were attacking Lyman from the south, from Dibrova, Shurov, Ozerno, from this area, were defeated, and their losses were about 70 soldiers and 13 armored vehicles. So to attack Lyman from area between, let's say, Priship towards Dibrova, Ozerno is a suicide operation, but the Ukrainians, they don't have any other option. They need to do this just at least with one purpose, to pin down the Russians, because as you can see, they can't crack Lyman nut. I believe that they will continue doing their job, but anyway, for now the Russians still control this area. Now let's talk about the north area, the area about towns Shandrigalova, Zelena Dolina, Kolodezi, Ivanovka, these towns. According to the Western sources map, you see that there are no changes in this area, but if we're talking about the Russian sources map, as you can see, the situation is very critical for the Russians. First of all, according to the Russian sources, towns by the name of Belogorovka, Kolodezi, Ivanovka, Zelena Dolina, Shandrigalova, all these towns are under Ukrainian control. And that's a lot, and if we compare just with this map, we understand that according to the Russian sources, some Russian sources, the Ukrainians control something like this in this area. If we are talking about some other Russian sources, like let's take a look at this map, you're gonna see that there are a lot of zones in this area. Like the red one is the area that is still under the Russians, and no problem with that. The area like without color or blue, or like without color, is the area under Ukrainian control. And as you can see, there is like orange red area between two zones is the gray zone where the main clashes are. And according to this map, as you can see, the Russians still control Kolodezi, this town Kolodezi, this one, and they still have possibility to support Lyman group from Tirny. Today we got different updates about this town. This morning, first we got that Ukrainians managed to get this town, to take control over this town. Later we got update that the Russians managed to do some counter-offensive operation, or maybe the Ukrainians just tried or made another attempt to take this town, but they were defeated, or so on. So for now, I can't say that this town is under Russian-Ukrainian control, but the thing is that another Russian sources reported that on the territory near Kolodezi, near this small town, near this Kolodezi, the Ukrainians have already collected a big, powerful armored vehicle fist, and their main goal, their main attack, their main direction is to attack this small town, Tarskoye, this one. Because as we discussed, the Russians, they have some possibilities to support this area. They have two roads. One road moves from Tirny, this one, through Kolodezi, but because of the fact that today we got some updates that this town may be taken by the Ukrainians, so that means that the Russians still have just one town, one road through Tarskoye, and then on the east side of these lakes and rivers, they are able to move in direction of Krasnorechskaya or Svatovo. So the situation is critical, and we can say that the Russians are already got into operational encirclement. And yesterday we discussed that also the Ukrainians managed to establish some control over this forest. And today we got some updates that the Ukrainians managed to push some forces, and they were trying to understand and to feel the defense line near Tarskoye from the south. If we take a look at this map, you're going to see that this is the area I'm talking about in the south. Dibrova, the small town, all these areas in the gray zone between Tarskoye, Kremenaya, and the supply road is in the gray zone. And as we discussed yesterday, it is very unsafe to use this road for supply and support. So as you can see, the situation is critical, but the important update that today the Ukrainians, we can say that their success for today is much less in comparison with the previous day. So we see that the Ukrainians also slowed down. I'm not saying that they're slowed down like very fast, but anyway, their pressure is reduced and they slowed down. Maybe they slowed down with one purpose: to accumulate more forces before the final rush, because they need to take control over this area between this square, between Terny, Tarskoye. If they are able to take control over this square, then we can say that the entire Russian group has been encircled and they're in a cauldron. It will be the first Ukrainian cauldron where the Russians will appear. So this situation. And if we're talking about the Russians, the question is, what do they plan to do? Because as we discussed, we saw, I believe that you saw a lot of videos from the open source about a lot of groups, about a lot of soldiers, mobilized soldiers. I believe that you saw a lot of videos of convoys, of regrouping and so on. But the question is, what do the Russians plan to do? Because they need to start counteroffensive operation. They need to have a stable connection between Lyman and the mainland. To tell the truth, today, during this day, I got first time during this Lyman defensive operation, I thought that I had a feeling that it might be some kind of a trap, and the main idea of this trap is to force the Ukrainians to move as much as possible soldiers they can. And my opinion that the Russians somewhere there, maybe they have their position on this area, maybe they have their position a little bit to the north, but the thing that they are doing, they are still waiting. They are still waiting when the Ukrainians will reduce their soldiers by their own hand as much as possible. Because for now, if we're talking about the situation from the Ukrainian perspective, we understand that it's a very tasty cake. We see that they have some success, and they see this as well. They understand that every day they get another square meters. I'm not sure that this is the real situation, because the thing is that the Russians are not retreating from Lyman. There are a lot of soldiers around. I believe it's my number. I haven't heard or read or found this, just my feeling that there might be around 3,000 soldiers from the Russian side, and there are forces from regular army, from volunteers, from professional forces, and they are not retreating. And believe me, this is not because of they decided to stand and to fight till the end. I don't think so. I think that the Russians prepare something, and the question is, what are the Russians preparing? My projection and my understanding of this situation, if I were the Russian, and if it was my it's up to me to decide what to do next, I believe that the Russians are not planning to attack the Ukrainians, let's say from the north, from Borovaya in direction to Yarova, to cut the Ukrainian forces in this back. I don't think that the Russians are planning to fight somewhere here, but maybe they have some fortification, some fortified position in this area, just one purpose: to stop the Ukrainians' offensive operation. But also, I'm not sure about this. I think that the Russians prepare or have already prepared something near Seversk, because to ruin the Ukrainian plans, it's not a very good idea to attack in front of attacker. So if Ukrainians attack in this direction, it's not a very good idea to attack right in front of them. Maybe as an option to attack from Borovo to the south, trying to cut, but there are a lot of supply roads, and the Ukrainians are moving a lot of force on this bridgehead, and I'm not sure that it's a very good idea. But the best option, according to my understanding, is to attack in direction of Seversk. So to do this attack, because if the Russians are able to attack in direction of Seversk, and if you remember, there are a lot of forces in this area, like Wagner Group, we see that there is a railroad station, and it's not a very big deal or problem for the Russians to move a lot of reinforcement, to deploy a lot of reinforcements during short period of time. So I believe that if the Russians are planning to do something, I believe that they will attack in direction of Seversk, because the battle for Seversk started a long time ago, and I believe that the Russians have already destroyed a lot of fortification. By attacking from the south, from Seversk, they will be able to encircle everything or to cut everything that on the north. That means that the Russians will be able to cut the Ukrainian forces in this forest from the north. That means that the Russians will be able to cut the Ukrainian forces on this bridgehead, like Ozerno Dibrova. And the thing is that these forces won't be able to go back on this side of Seversky Donetsk River, because it will take time, of course, and it will take a lot of time, and because of that, it's a very big risk that they will face the Russians on this side, right in front of them, the side of the river. So I believe that the Russians will try to do something like this, to make a very hard push, very hard attack, very powerful attack in direction of Seversk, and they will try to ruin everything on the south of Ukraine offensive forces, and they will try, and their main goal, their main town they would like to take is Nikolaevka, this bridgehead from, let's say, Bilogorovka, Lysychansk oil refinery plant in this direction. So with help of this, they will be able to at least to achieve some success. I believe that the Russians are planning to do something like this. If we are talking about other front lines, there were no changes on the other front lines, just the local battles. And to tell the truth, I'm tired to talk about counter-offensive operation near Zaporozhye, because every day we're saying that maybe this night the Ukrainians are planning to start something. Today we got very interesting update that Ukrainians are planning these days 3 counter-offensive operation, or not planning, they're planning to implement 3 counter-offensive operation. One of them they already implementing, and I'm talking about Lyman offensive operation, and the Ukrainians are saying about 2 other offensive operations somewhere on Ukrainian front line. But again, it might be another speculation just to force the Russians to move their reserves from Lyman defense operation towards Zaporozhye or maybe Kherson district or something like this. If we are talking about this area, if we're talking about Zaporozhye, the Russians are saying that as a result of their attack in Zaporozhye area, they destroyed around 100 soldiers and 20 armored vehicles. Furthermore, the Russians attacked some service center or maybe some industrial zone, and as a result, they managed to destroy around 10 artillery systems. Also, very interesting updates are coming from Kharkiv. The Russians are saying that as a result of their attack, they destroyed some plant in this area where around 19 tanks were located. I'm not sure about the destiny of those tanks, as the Ministry of Defense as well, but they noted that they attacked the area where the Ukrainians maybe were hiding, maybe were fixing or do some service stuff with 1990 tanks. So it's a very big loss if it's true. If those tanks were destroyed, that means that it's a very big loss for the Ukrainians. Now the Russians continue their regular job. They're attacking warehouses, the depots, their headquarters, some supply support roads. They're trying to shut down drones and so on. No changes. The only important update are coming from our famous and favorite Andreevka-Bilogorovka bridgehead. As you remember, the Ukrainians managed to build this bridgehead in the end of August, while the first counter-offensive operation, and then they were defeated and they are stopped. They couldn't, these days they couldn't do anything. But the thing is that according to the Russian sources, according to information I have, the Ukrainians, they lost every single town in this area. They lost Kostromka, Счастливо, Безымянное. The only area that is still under Ukrainian control is Sukhoy Stavok, but it's not even under their control. I believe that this town is something like under fire control, because, or maybe some commandos or scouts are moving forward just to trying to recognize or find the Russians commandos as well, because the Russians are saying that Ukrainians establish their position along the river. They control Bilogorka, Lazova, Andreevka, and this small town Malosidimuha. So they control every single town along the river, and they can't move further. And they're not moving further, and they're not, I believe, planning to do this because of the fact that the Russians are using their aircrafts in this area, and the Ukrainians can't do anything with this. So they decided just to be on the safe side, and if the Russians decided to start some counter-offensive operation in this area, they need to be on the safe side, just with one purpose: to move from this area as fast as possible. And that's it with the story of the counter-offensive operation in Kherson district. If we are talking about the losses, the Russians continue shelling and attacking the 28th Brigade, 59th Brigade, and as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians on Nikolaev bridgehead, on Nikolaev Frontline, lost around 90 soldiers and around 18 armored vehicles. And that's it. There are no more movements or changes on the front line. The Russians continue doing their mobilization. More people are saying that the first wave of the Russian mobilization on the front line we're going to see somewhere in November, or in the end of November, in the beginning of December. Now the Russians are moving a lot of forces, trying to send on the front lines those guys who finished their army service in the army maybe less than half a year ago. And that's it. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.